you describe the conditions of the detention center right now for him?
So it is. The food is inedible, from what I've been told. It's way too hot in the summer. Sometimes there's no heat at all in the winter. The toilet water has been known to freeze. It's violent. Someone like Mr. Combs, might be a target for certain things.
The Metropolitan Detention Center that is currently housing indicted rapper Sean Diddy Combs is now under federal investigation. Why this might be happening, and could it have anything to do with Sean Combs? We'll talk about it. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. So in the spotlight right now is not Sean Combs. No, he's in the spotlight. That's probably incorrect. He's in the spotlight. I would say what we're really going to focus in is not just Sean Combs, but also the jail that he's locked up in while he awaits trial. We want to talk about the Metropolitan Detention Center, to be exact. You see, it's being reported that investigators from the Bureau of Prisons, the DOJ's Inspector General's office, and other agencies have launched a, quote, interagency operation at the MDC. Why? What are they looking into? Why now? Right? Especially now that Sean Combs is being detained there. And that part's not entirely clear, right? We don't really know whether it has anything to do with Sean Combs or other specific inmates or detainees. What I will say is that there was this joint statement that was released, and it says that this operation was, quote, designed to achieve our shared goal of maintaining a safe environment for both our employees and the incarcerated individuals housed at MDC Brooklyn. Now, the Bureau of Prisons has said that this operation was already planned and that there's, quote, no active threat, and they also said that they wouldn't reveal too much information at this point. Quote, in an effort to maintain the safety and security of all personnel inside the facility and the integrity of this operation. That's why they're not going to reveal more information. Now, I will say, reporting indicates that perhaps authorities may be doing a surprise, widespread search of contraband at the facility, although we can't confirm if that's the exact reason. But there are a few things to note here when we talk about the MDC. The MDC, which houses approximately 1,200 people, mostly those who are arrested and those who are awaiting trial, as well as those serving short sentences, this is a facility that has been plagued with issues: violence, deplorable conditions, not enough manpower, drug smuggling. In fact, earlier this year, New York Representative Dan Goldman stated he would file a formal request for an investigation into the MDC. He released a statement saying, quote, over the last 2 years, there have been steady reports of deteriorating conditions at MDC harming inmates and correctional officers alike, including chronic understaffing, perpetual solitary confinement, and widespread violence. And then he said how a federal judge earlier this year cited the prison system's dreadful conditions as a reason not to remand a defendant to MDC. He said, quote, earlier this year, I toured MDC with the warden and executives from the Bureau of Prisons, all of whom acknowledged the improvements needed at the facility. Unfortunately, conditions have only gotten worse. And Representative Goldman also cited the death of at least 4 inmates in the period of 7 months, and even highlighted the death of Edwin Corradero, who was a 36-year-old inmate who died in a fight at the MDC. The feds actually ended up charging multiple inmates last month in connection with a series of attacks at this federal lockup, including one incident of a stabbing with an ice pick and also an attack on a corrections officer. By the way, speaking corrections officers, we have another former CO who actually pled guilty to smuggling cell phone chargers into the MDC. And by the way, recently, another inmate was charged in a murder plot to kill a rival on the outside. But in the end, all that happened was an innocent bystander was shot, a 28-year-old woman outside of a nightclub. Apparently, the inmate used a contraband cell phone to plan this failed attack. In terms of the conditions, give you another update, inmates, they won a $10 million settlement over freezing during a blackout that lasted over a week back in 2019. So you're getting a sense of what's happening at the MDC, right? By the way, as you can see, we're trying to bring you every major update in the Sean Combs saga, and I got to call out our sponsors because they help make shows like this happen. And in particular, let me tell you about our incredible partner, Morgan & Morgan. If you should get hurt, Morgan & Morgan, America's largest injury law firm, maybe who you want in your corner. They have a dedicated army of 1,000 lawyers, case specialists, paralegals, investigators. There's no upfront fee. The whole process can be done straight from your smartphone. It's so simple. Oh, and of course, they have a very impressive track record. I'll give you an example. I'm talking recent verdicts of $6.8 million in New York, $12 million in Florida, and $26 million in Philadelphia. And even if your case isn't worth millions of dollars, Morgan & Morgan will fight for what you deserve. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC Sidebar. Now, when it comes to Sean Combs, who has been denied bail twice so far, even though he's actively fighting it, we believe, based on reporting, that he's being housed in the MDC's special housing unit, which our understanding mostly consists of him sitting in his cell for 23 hours a day. This is due to safety concerns. In fact, here's his attorney, Mark Agnifilo, describing the conditions of the MDC.
Can you describe the conditions of the detention center right now for us?
So it is. The food is inedible, from what I've been told. It's way too hot in the summer. Sometimes there's no heat at all in the winter. The toilet water has been known to freeze. It's violent. Someone like Mr. Combs, might be a target for certain things.
Okay, so what's going on here? How could this affect Sean Combs? Does this investigation have anything to do with the high-profile nature of Sean Combs' case? Well, let me bring in prison consultant Justin Paperny to talk a little bit more about this. Justin, so good to see you. Thanks for coming on. Before we even get into this latest development about what this investigation could be, what do you know about the MDC?
I know for quite some time they've needed long-term change there. Safety issues around the prison, the contraband. There is a problem at the top with leadership. When you're in high metropolitan areas, it's tough to get people to want to work there. There's high turnover. So this leadership failure is putting prisoners in jeopardy. There's very little accountability. I will tell you, when you hear interagency operation, that tells me this is very, very serious. They've had enough. I think Diddy being in prison at this time, I think it just aligns with that's been going on for quite some time. I will say I think it's concerning that they're not going to share details of the investigation until it's complete. The biggest problem is the lack of transparency and accountability. And until that changes, it's going to be more of the same, more prisoners getting hurt, more safety issues, more settlements that taxpayers fund. The Bureau of Prisons needs more accountability. And until that happens, we're just going to continue to have these calls in the weeks, months, and years to come.
Well, the other way of looking at that is they want to be sensitive. They don't want to release too much information during the course of this investigation that could jeopardize whatever they're looking into. So imagine, for example, they really are doing a widespread sweep of contraband. I mentioned some of the incidents that are happening. If they, make that announcement or they kind of give more details, perhaps people could get rid of the evidence. Someone could help them. And you tell me if I'm looking at it the wrong way.
Sure. I think prudent transparency would be a good phrase, right? I know they're doing investigations. They might not want to divulge everything they're finding, but they could be updating stakeholders along the way. People are concerned about people are in prison. Their loved ones are concerned for them. They want to see some progress and growth. So I'm not suggesting they share everything that could threaten the security of the institution, which is really what any prison cares most about: security of the institution, keeping costs down. But if they care about keeping costs down, they're making decisions that only increase costs. So they should share some information prudently to at least appease people who have an interest in overseeing this process.
What do you think is going on here? Why do you think this investigation is about? Do you think it's about looking for contraband or something else?
I think certainly it's looking for contraband. They know when you have myriad agencies looking into this, there is a problem. And it's getting to a point where people have said enough. There's got to be effective leadership at the top. It needs to trickle down to staff. They may have to pay correctional officers more money. It's tough to get people to work in these communities, as I have said. So they're at a point where they have said this is a national embarrassment. It's something that both Democrats and Republicans agree on, which is pretty damn uncommon in this environment. So they're at a point where they say we want transparency, we want long-term change, we want accountability for staff, which is something that's been lacking over a sustained period of time. So I think they view this as an opportunity, but they tend to lack transparency in the process. I would argue the more they give, the more trust they're actually going to receive. And if they acknowledge failings along the way, people are then going to say they're beginning to get it. They're not hiding, they're sharing. Only then can you have improvement. But it's difficult for anyone, including a massive bureaucratic agency, to say, we've made mistakes. Here's how we're going to do better. There tends to be too much blaming and excusing, not enough accountability.
And to give you an idea of that, I mean, the Bureau of Prisons announced last month that it was going to increase staffing at the MDC by about 20%. But it's our understanding there's still a lot of positions left open, which is a scary thing to think about in terms of a facility that houses that many detainees. I guess the question is, when we're thinking about this, and we'll talk about Combs in a second, but when we're thinking about the MDC, are the issues that are plaguing this facility just individual to this facility, or is this typical of federal lockups, other state lockups? Is the MDC an outlier? What can you tell us?
It's very common across the country. There are certain areas where it's just more expensive to live. New York could be a more expensive area to live. I know the federal prison in Sheridan, Oregon. Oregon can be an expensive place to live. They've had trouble staffing that prison because if you're making $60,000, $80,000 a year, I'm not saying it's not a lot of money. What I'm saying is that you can't sustain yourself living in that town. So the consequence is they don't have enough staff. There's not enough programs for the prisoners. Certain programs like the residential drug abuse program in the federal system that could take a year off of your system, a year off your sentence upon completion, can no longer be run in that prison because there's not enough staff. Well, what does that mean? In California, for example, there isn't one camp or prison that offers the drug program. If you want to go to Oregon, you may have to go to Minnesota, Yankton, because of staff shortages. So they need to train better, they need to pay better, and they need to find a way to somehow retain the talent. And until they have, just going to be this revolving door. And that's part of the reason they're going through this massive investigation. And they're finally asking good questions. What can we do to keep people on our team for longer periods of time, protect prisoners, and have more accountability for staff? It's reached a point where people have simply had enough.
Do you think that has anything to do with Sean Combs? Do you think it took a high-profile celebrity to be housed there? And remember, there's R. Kelly who was there. Sam Bankman-Fried is he's serving a sentence there. But let me ask you a question. Do you think it takes somebody like a Sean Combs who's there to bring attention to this? Do you think he's a factor in why this investigation is being launched?
I don't. I think it's been going on since Epstein hung himself in that adjacent prison. They knew that it was a problem boiling up for quite some time. And then with the publicity that came with Epstein, they had said we'd had enough. But when you're dealing with
and just to be clear about that, that was the MCC. It closed in 2021. But
correct. It's an adjacent prison, but still,
Yep.
We're dealing with problems in these prison systems in New York. And I just think it got to a point where they said there's too much attention on us. We just can't turn away from this any longer. And when you're dealing with the BOP, it's like the DMV times 100 with the bureaucracy, right? It takes so long to get these investigations going. And now that when you have several agencies involved in this operation, imagine the coordination of getting all these people together. This has been going on for weeks, months, and years. I just hope, as I said earlier, there's some prudent transparency and they're sharing progress, both good and bad. I would argue the more bad they share, the more they share what they could have done better and what they are learning, the more trust they're going to get from stakeholders like politicians. Until they do that, it's going to continue to say anything and threaten security of the institution. It's the same old playbook that doesn't work, and it's part of the reason there's such loathing from the left and right on how the BOP manages these issues.
The reason I asked is because his lawyers, his lawyer Mark Agnifilo was quite vocal about the problems in that jail. Having said that, Combs at one point, his legal team was actually trying to transfer him to a jail in New Jersey. They seem to have abandoned that. I think they said at the time that the MDC was responsive to them. Not exactly sure what that meant. But now, look, Combs is trying to fight bail again. He's trying to ask the current judge, the new judge who's overseeing this case, Judge Arun Subramanian, to grant him bail. So this is a third judge that would consider it. Do you think that this investigation and these issues plaguing the MDC would work in his favor to get him bail or pretrial release?
I don't. There are people in that prison who aren't getting bail for charges that are far less severe than his. And one thing the Bureau of Prisons want to do is treat him differently based on his status. If anything, you could argue they're going to make it harder. I empathize with his lawyer. He's saying what he's paid to say, but his client has to own and acknowledge his own conduct, not just the alleged crime, his post-offense conduct where the government felt he is a threat. Immunity And for that reason, I expect him, regardless of who the judge is, to continue to be confined. And until he begins making different decisions, perhaps accepting responsibility, cooperating. I filmed a YouTube video where I said yesterday he should agree to turn over every dollar he has to victims and victims' rights groups. It's the only way he doesn't serve 50 or 60 years in prison. Maybe it's how he gets 15 or 20. The onus is on him to make better decisions. Until then, you can expect his lawyer to continue to say what lawyers are paid to say. My guy should be free. It doesn't work not in this environment.
Well, the other way of looking at it is he is innocent until proven guilty. He hasn't been found liable in any of these lawsuits. He's denying all the allegations. I will ask you, though, when it comes to this, somebody this high profile, housed in an institution like this, his attorney alluded to the fact that he might be a target, talked about the violence in the MDC. How much of it is a concern if you're Sean Combs being in this facility, that your life might be in danger?
It's certainly a concern. There are people in prison who have been there for a very long time, who may feel forgotten, could care less if they're in prison for the rest of their life, if they go to a higher security prison, if they get transferred to go to the hole. So there is no doubt there is concern for his safety and his health, which is part of the reason he remains confined. Though I will tell you, there's a lot of high-profile people in prison. We look at the Menendez guys getting out of prison potentially after 36 years. They've gotten through it. There are high-profile people who have been able to get through it. The downside for Combs is it's just more scrutiny. It's more time in isolation. It's a harder experience. But there's no doubt there's risks for his life there. And if he gets to the general population, he's really going to have to understand his environment. He's going to have to understand how people are studying him and watching him. It requires humility in how he responds. I know if he pleads guilty or is convicted and gets sentenced, we'll eventually talk about his life in that general population or how to even get through a very lengthy federal prison sentence. But to your question, there is no question. There's risk for his health, and he thinks about it, and so does his family, 24 hours a day.
What do you think the result of this investigation is going to be? How much will we know what happens? Because I will say, Representative Goldman, who I mentioned before, he talked about how he co-sponsored the Federal Prison Oversight Act, which my understanding requires the DOJ's Inspector General's office to conduct vigorous oversight of the federal prison system. I wonder if what we're seeing now is part of that. But what do you imagine is going to result from this interagency investigation?
It's hard for people to see it, especially if their loved one has just come into the system. But change, it is getting better. Colette Peters has been an excellent director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. She says we want to make good neighbors, not good inmates. But you have to understand this massive bureaucracy change takes time. So because I've been to prison and I've been in this space full time for the last 15 years, my business partner served 26 years in prison. He went to the penitentiary in 1987. It was measurably worse then. So we are seeing change. It's getting better. Unfortunately, it's not as fast as people would like, but I expect there to be more transparency, more accountability, more acknowledgments of failures. I think she's been a very good leader for the Federal Bureau of Prisons. There's been transition and turnover. I expect her to stay there for quite some time. I expect to see more progress and, more importantly, accountability and transparency. And it all starts with saying we've made mistakes. They need to do what they expect people who are indicted of crimes to do, right? I get indicted for a crime. We want you to accept responsibility. We want you to say that you're going to do better. You're going to hold yourself accountable. You're going to prove worthy of a second chance. We want the Bureau to do the same exact thing for mistakes they have made.
Justin Paperny, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate it.
Good to see you.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.